Your hands are filthy. Not gym dirty, not gardening dirty. The kind of dirty that breeds disease. The kind that killed more people in the 1930s than the hunger did. Cracked skin. Open sores. Infection tracking up your wrist like a vine. The water's running. Maybe, but soap hasn't been on the shelf for 3 weeks. The store that had it burned down. The one that didn't burn down the next day. And you've got a family to keep alive in a world that just stopped caring whether you made it. Here's something the history books gloss over when they talk about the Great Depression. It wasn't just starvation that killed people. It was filth, typhoid, dysentery, skin infections that turned septic before anyone understood what was happening. Basic hygiene collapsed right alongside the economy, and the people who figured out how to make their own soap from trash and fire were the ones who came out the other side. Soap isn't a luxury, it's a medical intervention. And the recipe for it has existed for over 4,000 years. Scratched into Babylonian clay tablets, refined by medieval monks, scaled up by frontier women who couldn't run to the general store. You don't need a chemistry lab. You don't need anything you can't pull from a fireplace and a slaughterhouse scrap pile. What you need is to understand why soap works, and how the Depression-era housewife made it with nothing but patience, lye water, and animal fat that would have otherwise gone to the hogs. Let's start with what soap actually is, because if you don't understand the chemistry, you can't troubleshoot when it goes wrong. And it will go wrong the first time. Soap is the product of a chemical reaction called saponification. That's the fancy word. Here's the plain version. You take a strong alkali, meaning something intensely basic on the pH scale, and you combine it with a fat. The alkali breaks the fat molecules apart and rearranges them into something entirely new, a soap molecule. That molecule is fascinating, because one end of it is attracted to water and one end is attracted to grease and oil. When you wash your hands, the soap molecules surround the grease and bacteria, grab them, and let the water carry them away. That's it. That's the whole trick. 4,000 years of civilization, and it still comes down to that one weird molecule that can't make up its mind between water and oil. In the Great Depression, they didn't have commercial lye pellets from the hardware store. They made their own. They had been making their own for centuries, and the raw material was sitting in every fireplace in America. Wood ash. Here's how ash becomes lye. Hardwood ash, oak, hickory, maple, cherry, is rich in potassium carbonate. When you dissolve that ash in water, a slow chemical process begins. The potassium carbonate reacts with the water to form potassium hydroxide, which is lye, not sodium hydroxide, which is what you get in modern lye pellets, but potassium hydroxide. Same basic chemical family, slightly different properties. Potassium lye makes a softer soap. Sodium lye makes hard bar soap. Depression-era families mostly made soft soap, which looked like a thick jelly and worked just as well. To make lye water, you need a leaching barrel. The old-timers called it an ash hopper. Here's the setup. Find a wooden barrel, a bucket, or any container that can hold ash and water. Line the bottom with a layer of straw, hay, or even dried grass if that's all you've got. The straw acts as a filter. Fill the barrel with hardwood ash. Not coal ash, not charcoal ash, pure wood ash. Pack it in loosely, then pour water over the top, slowly. Rainwater was preferred because it's soft water, meaning it has fewer minerals that can interfere with the process. But any clean water works. The water trickles down through the ash, dissolving the potassium compounds as it goes, and drips out through the straw at the bottom into a collection vessel. What drips out is lye water. It looks like weak tea or thin coffee. It doesn't look dangerous. It very much is. And this is where you have to slow down, because lye water will blind you. It will eat through your skin. It will do to your hands what it does to fat molecules. Break them down. Every person who made soap in the Depression understood this. Not from safety data sheets, but from painful experience passed down through the family. Keep it off your skin. Keep it out of your eyes. Work outdoors or in a ventilated space, because the fumes when it reacts with fat are acrid and thick. You're not manufacturing a weapon, but you're working with something that demands respect. How strong does your lye water need to be? The old test involved an egg or a potato. Float a fresh egg in the lye water. If the egg sinks completely, the lye is too weak. Add more ash and keep leaching. If the egg floats with too much of the shell above the surface, the lye is too strong. Dilute it. The sweet spot is when about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of the egg peaks above the surface. That's roughly the right concentration to saponify fat properly. It's not precise by modern standards, but it worked for 200 years before anyone had a pH meter. Now for the fat. In the Depression, nothing was wasted. Bacon grease was saved in coffee cans on the back of the stove. Beef tallow was rendered from suet, the hard, dense fat around the kidneys of cattle. Lard came from hogs rendered down and strained into a cloudy white block. Even chicken fat, called schmaltz in some households, was collected. Whatever fat came through that kitchen got saved, clarified, and eventually turned into soap if there was enough of it. Clarifying the fat is important. Raw fat contains bits of meat, blood, moisture, and impurities that will rot and ruin your soap. Here's how to clean it. Melt the fat in a large pot over low heat. Add an equal volume of water and bring it to a slow boil. Let it simmer for 20 minutes. Then remove it from heat. Let it cool completely. The fat will solidify on top. Underneath it, the water will have absorbed all the blood, proteins, and impurities. Lift off the fat cake. Scrape any dark residue from the underside. That's your clean, clarified fat. Do it twice if the fat looked particularly messy. Now you're ready. The ratio for Depression-era soft soap was roughly 1 part fat to 1 part lye water by volume, though experienced soap makers adjusted by feel and by how the batch was behaving. This is where modern soap making parts ways with the old methods. There's considerably more guesswork when you're working with homemade lye of uncertain concentration. But the principle holds. Use a large iron kettle or any heavy pot that won't react with the lye. Aluminum is a problem. Lye eats aluminum. Cast iron, stainless steel, enamelware, all fine. Melt your fat slowly until it's fully liquid and warm but not hot. Separately, measure your lye water. Slowly, carefully, pour the lye water into the fat. Never the other way. Always lye into fat, not fat into lye. The reaction can be violent if you add fat to concentrated lye. Stir constantly. Depression-era women stirred soap for hours, sitting by the fire in the evening, stirring the pot with a long wooden spoon. They stirred it in the morning before the kids woke up. The chemistry requires agitation to proceed. As you stir, the mixture begins to change. It starts cloudy and separated, like an ugly oil and water mixture that refuses to cooperate. Then slowly, over 30 minutes an hour, sometimes 2, it begins to come together. The texture thickens. It starts to look like pudding, or like very thick gravy. Eventually, if you drizzle a bit from your spoon, it leaves a faint trace on the surface. They called this tracing. Trace means saponification is happening. You're making soap. For soft soap, once you hit trace, you can pour it into whatever container you have, crocks, buckets, old tin cans, and let it set. It won't be a hard bar. It'll be a thick gel, scoopable with a spoon. 1 tablespoon in a bowl of water creates lather. 1 tablespoon in a bucket of laundry water gets your clothes clean. If you wanted hard bar soap, the kind that was traded, sold, given as gifts during the Depression, you needed sodium hydroxide instead of potassium hydroxide. To make the lye water lean towards sodium hydroxide, Depression-era chemists would concentrate the lye through evaporation, or they'd add salt. Boiling the lye water down concentrates it. Adding salt to the concentrated lye water helps shift the chemistry toward the sodium compounds that produce harder soap. It's not perfect, it's not precise, but it works well enough. The resulting soap, poured into a wooden mold lined with a cloth, would cure for several weeks, hardening as the last of the chemical reaction completed and the excess moisture evaporated. Curing matters. Fresh soap still contains unreacted lye. It's harsh and can burn skin. Cured soap has fully saponified, the pH has dropped to a skin-safe range, and what you're left with is a true functional bar. Depression families cured soap on shelves in cool, dry cellars. They'd make a season's worth in one big batch. The fall slaughter meant fat was available. The wood stove had been running all season and the ash barrel was full. One afternoon's work, a few weeks of curing, and the family had soap until spring. Here's what nobody talks about when they romanticize the Great Depression era: the smell. Lye soap has a distinctive, almost medicinal scent. Old-timers added herbs, lavender, rosemary, pine resin. To soften the harshness, they added oatmeal for a gentle scrubbing texture. Honey for moisture. Not because they were running a boutique bath product operation, but because these were practical improvements discovered through decades of use. If you're making soap and you've got access to dried herbs, pine needles, or even coffee grounds, add them at trace. They become part of the bar. They make it better. And here is the part that matters most. If you're making this soap in a crisis, not for a history fair project. Soap is currency. It was in the Depression, and it will be again whenever the supply chain breaks. A bar of soap in 1933 could be traded for a meal. A crock of soft soap could be bartered for seeds, tools, or information. The people who understood how to make things that everyone needed, soap, candles, bread, medicine, had leverage in an economy that had otherwise destroyed most leverage ordinary people had. They weren't rich, but they weren't helpless either. The skill lives at the intersection of fire, chemistry, and patience. You're not a chemist. You're not a factory. You're someone with a fire, a pile of ash, and the remnants of something that used to be alive, and you're going to combine them into something that keeps your family's hands clean, their wounds from going septic, their clothes from carrying infection. The ash is in your fireplace right now. The fat is in the pan you cook dinner in. The knowledge is right here. The Depression-era housewife who kept her children alive in a dirt-floor shack with no running water and no income knew something you now know too. The world runs out of things. It always has. What doesn't run out is fire, wood, fat, and the stubborn human refusal to live like an animal in the dark. Make your soap, cure it. Keep it somewhere dry. Make more than you need. The people who have the things everyone else forgot how to make don't just survive collapse, they have something the rest of the world comes looking for, and that is a completely different position to be in when everything else falls apart.